Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest. Thank you for joining us this week. Well, we're going to get into a deep dive conversation with Scott Berman, who runs Sky Cave Retreats. That's the place that I did my darkness retreat. I got a lot of press recently when Aaron Rodgers went there and did his darkness retreat there. It's a really wild place. I gave you my perspective on it, and I thought it was definitely worth getting into it in more detail on how this whole thing came about, what are the advantages, and it's a fascinating conversation essentially into psychology and consciousness and what it means to strip things away and just be with ourselves. So I know that you are going to enjoy this conversation with Scott. But first, I have some new dates to announce and some things, just a little housekeeping to put out there. We just announced that I'm going to be playing at a special after-party event. So MAPS is having a big conference in Denver in late June, and Propeller is putting on a really amazing event on June 21st, the solstice. And I'll be doing a ceremony concert there in Denver, Colorado. All the tickets for all these events are at eastforest.org. But it'll be myself, Beretta, Caitlin Aurelius Smith, and Bonobo. So killer lineup. Check it out, ceremony concert. And might be doing something at the MAPS event as well later in the week, so stay tuned. But then I'll be at Bottlerock even sooner, and that's in Napa, California. That's late May 26th through 28th. And just after that, we added a talk and guided meditation at Stanford University at the D.school, the design school. That'll be on May 30th. And that event is free and open to the public. So if you want to learn more about that talk, we're going to be talking about psychedelic design. And another way of talking about that is ceremony. But in general, it's just a fascinating and important question. So if you want to come to that talk, I won't be playing live music, but it's going to be a great engagement. That's on May 30th. And then I'll be at the Beyond the Pale in Ireland, June 16th through 18th. And then later in the summer, Dreamersland in Poland is in early August, and then we just added a London date. So all my friends in the UK, I promise we're getting there. We're getting back to London on August 13th, and tickets are on sale. That's going to be a joint show with Peter Broderick, which is going to be amazing because we're going to just make it a real happening where we improvise right there live on stage. Never done anything like this with somebody else, and we're doing our best to call in the magic and do it together in the room. So all those dates are at eastforest.org/tour. And I just want to thank everyone on our Patreon council. We had a new sign up, Krister. I want to thank you so much for joining into the council and adding your support into the mix. Everyone on the council, it's just a great way to engage with one another through our monthly Zoom counselor, or a place for me to share demos or live recordings, which I've recently done. And it's just, I appreciate that kind of extra support. It means a lot to me. I also want to thank Tina and Joseph, who signed up recently, and welcome to the council. You can check it out. Patreon.com/eastforest is the way to throw in that extra support if you're able to do that. Lots of different tiers. And if you're new to this podcast, I would encourage you to dig into all of the past episodes. There are over 250 at this point, and they're evergreen. So you get past my introductions, and there's some just amazing guests that I've been blessed to be able to talk with over the years. And I don't want those conversations not to be highlighted by you or dove into. So if you haven't, just scroll through there and see what's interesting to you. And I promise you'll hear a lot of richness from a lot of amazing individuals. Otherwise, I just released a new song with Anna, the wonderful Anna, and this song is called Let You In. I love this track. We're going to have Anna on the podcast within a week or two. I think we're going to be recording this week. She's a very busy person, hard to pin down, always out there playing gigs all over the world. But we've been experimenting with tracks together. We'll dive into it more during that episode. But this one that came out, if you haven't heard it, it's a lot of fun. And I got to sing and play piano, and she did a lot of her analog beats and synthesis, and it's just good vibes. It feels like spring moving into the summer type vibes, and this whole refrain of, I love it. So go check it out wherever you listen to music. and let us know what you think. You can always reach out at team@EastForest, or of course on social media, East Forest or East Forest Music. Okay. Well, I think that's enough of housekeeping. Otherwise, I'm just down here in southern Utah making a big move, but I won't get too much into that. It's been great to be here, but I'm going to be back on the road soon and looking forward to seeing you out there. But let's get into this fascinating conversation with our friend Scott Berman. Well, Scott, it's good to see you in your element out there in the greenery in the far reaches of Oregon. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. Last time I saw you, I was leaving the darkness retreat at your retreat center, and I was very fragile and had a really powerful experience. I feel like it's still reverberating very much in my life. And, just a little background for people. You had reached out many months ago and sort of mentioned that you had this darkness retreat center, and you make some invitations for certain artists or people that you might think could be a benefit for. And I knew about darkness retreats. Aubrey Marcus was on this podcast. He's a friend, of course, and spoke about his experience. It was on my radar, but it was something I was curious about, but also thought sounded like a real pain in the ass and would probably be really difficult. And so when you invited me, there was that sinking sensation of the universe serving it up and me thinking oh man, I have to do this. I know I have to do this, but I didn't really want to do it. And there was a bit of a internal clash there, but it was beneficial for me. But it really brought up a lot of emotion. But I just wanted to give that background, just the start. I don't know. Maybe pass it off to you.
Yeah. Well, I guess, one of the questions that I have is what's the lasting effect of it that's stayed with you, or that's revealed something to you that's shifted things in your life?
Yeah, I mean, let's get right into it. And at some point, we'll get some background on how you got into this and what this all is. But this is great. We'll go right into it. So I did a podcast where I talked about my experience in there and when it was really fresh. And so I won't rehash it completely. But in a general, where I'm at right now, it was just kind of amazing when you're in there how there's nothing left covering up what's at the base of a lot of your stuff. And that was uncomfortable. And so I felt all this guilt and shame a lot in there, among other things. But that was a really difficult emotion. It just kept coming up and kept coming up and kept coming up. And I was able to source back sitting in the bathtub a lot and just sit there and track back. I'm well, when did I not feel that, And or when did I not? I had never ever experienced it, and I kind of went back to age 5 or age 6 when it started to shift, and it was really school and other things, essentially traumas that took me into a different direction of having to cope. And I just realized how things happen to us, and I noticed in my mind this was everyone. This happens, things happen to us. It's not that we are at fault. The world is a certain way, or you're traumatized, or all sorts of things occur. And I had compassion for myself to think my reaction and the ways I've built up responses against that, including this guilt and shame, stem from things that happened to me. And it's okay that I feel what I feel. And so in some ways it took a bit of the pressure off of the guilt and shame of having guilt and shame, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't feel great in the moment. It was a big aha, but I've noticed over time that there actually has been a lasting effect of, in some strange way, it's really illuminated what's really important to me, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
The immediate things in my life, my partnership with Radha was already important to me, but now it just feels this is just so beautiful and So it's really improved our relationship in that way, because I think my energy I'm bringing to it is just like clearer and calmer and more loving. And I would hope that sort of energy is bleeding out into other things I'm doing as well. The last thing I'll say for now is that I think in some ways that clarity also brought a little bit of, what's the right word? I don't want to say unassuredness, but I started to come out of the fog of all the pushing and everything I've been doing career-wise and music-wise. Like, I've had a lot of drive in my life, but I think part of me started to see, like, how do I really want to do this? Like, the actual how, you know, and not wanting to be pushing so much. But that's been a transition that is underway, but is not clear to me. It's been a bit uncomfortable, and I'm having to allow it to sort of take shape naturally of how I work in the world. So
yeah, I mean, I think one of, like, what you touched on of like what was most important, you know, like what matters most. I think that becomes a core thing that so many people, everyone who goes into the dark in some way touches, and that it usually comes on through discomfort, because it's like, why am I uncomfortable? There's somebody who came out a few months ago, and one of the things he said, he's like, wow, like I thought that I really liked myself. And then I went into the dark and I was like, well, why am I uncomfortable? Like, I thought I really liked myself. Then why am I uncomfortable? And just like what it exposes and reveals.
Wow.
It's fascinating how, not necessarily intentionally, but how easy we can like hide in the world, or even if we live a simple life, there's still not really fully seeing what's happening or like where we're at, because we're engaged in the world. And then all of a sudden you step into the dark, and then all that exists, all that you have to relate to is yourself. And so you really begin to see where you're at. And it's like everyone's surprised. I mean, I'm surprised, and I've gone in 7 or 8 different times, and each time I go in, there's more that's revealed and exposed that I prior had no access to see.
Didn't you say that you did a darkness experience for, I mean, it was like over a month or something?
No, there was a time where I was 40 days in solitude up in the mountains in Baja, where I used to spend a lot of solitude, but 10 days has been the most that I've done. And I've gone in like a few times for 10 days, and then other times for shorter amounts.
So, you know, right there, I think I just myself fell into a trap that I have a lot of like angst against, which is this economy of scale. Like someone's saying, like, was it 10 or was it 12 or was it 7? Like that's what makes it bigger or better. And that's actually one of the first things I came across in myself when I got there. It's like I went in, and you said kind of like go in for a practice night, kind of warm up, which I don't know, it's the afternoon or something. And I did that. I'm in there in the dark, and I'm eating the dinner, the soup. I immediately spilled the soup in the dark. And I woke up in the morning and was completely disoriented. And that's when all the emotions started to come up. And this was my practice day. And I'm just thinking, like, what is going on? Like, I feel like I'm exploding. Is this normal? Is this? And, you know, we ended up with you and Adrian, who's wonderful, developing. It's like, well, let's make this what it needs to be for you. And you reassuring me that that's what this always is. Like, it's always what is needed for the individual. But I think I had in my mind it had to be a certain program, sort of like Navy SEALs BUDS training or something. It's like, well, you got to finish it, and this is how it's always like this, and you fail or you succeed. And I really struggle with that. Even now, I have a little bit of like judgment that comes up for myself. It's like, well, I came in and out of the dark, but I quickly can be like, what? All I know is like, it was a powerful experience for me that has benefited my life. And it was difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that sentiment of like longer is deeper, longer is more, and that there is this sense of having to finish whatever amount of time someone's in there, all these different overlays that we have. And the truth is some of the people who have had the biggest movements and awakenings and insights, and however one wants to qualify it, have been in for 2 to 4 days. And we've had people in for 10 days, 16 days, 20 days, 30 days, 40 days. And I mean, as humans, we're so good at surviving and coping, and in that dissociating and numbing and insulating and all the different things that we have. And people do that in the dark. And then when they go in for too long, whatever that is for them, then that really comes online, and people tend to like lean out, and they may make it through their entire time. And then when they get to day 9 of their 10 days in there, they finally relax because it's almost over, and they open and they have an experience, and they're like, wow, 10 days is so important, because on the 9th day, and somebody hears that and they're like, whoa, you got to do 10 days. And it's like, actually, that's just not what we've seen. It's not like the length of time does not equal really anything. It's how deep you are in it, and not how long it actually is. And in a lot of cases, shorter allows people to go deeper because they feel safer, because the amount of discomfort that they have to endure isn't as long. And then all of a sudden there's like an including of the discomfort, there's an including of the shadow, and then kind of there's the depth really starts to emerge.
You said something about like folks can go in there with a really strong practice, and in effect it allows them to, quote, hold up the dark. And I thought a lot about that, and versus just kind of letting it all go and, you know, letting the experience be what it is. And maybe the kinds of, like the cracks that the dark creates and the collapse that the weight of it, in a sense, is the medicine, in a sense, you know, and holding it up with like, I'm going to do yoga for 10 hours or whatever it is, perhaps is a disservice to the experience.
It seems that way. I mean, that's how, from what I witness, like the people who touch something really brand new it's not through the practices and the things that they normally do, because that just keeps them mostly in what they know. And so when someone just softens, opens, surrenders, is with discomfort or whatever's there is like a moving into uncharted territory, as opposed to doing your yoga and the meditation and your chanting, which has its benefits for sure. And it really it tends to keep people in the sense of the doer. It's like they're here doing this practice, staying in what they know, and moving beyond that is certainly where the darkness takes you. And like you said, the weight of the darkness, that's a thing that a lot of people reference. There was a woman who was here some months ago, a spiritual teacher with all her spiritual practices and all her spiritually organized self. And she was in there, and when I went up on day 4 and we were chatting, she was crying, and she's like, the darkness finally broke me. She was like, I couldn't hold the weight up of the darkness anymore through all my practices. And she's like, in that moment, she's like, I see that I resent my dad. And because of that, I see how I resent all men, and how, like, why my relationships don't work out, and like all these things, where she was like, prior, because of my spiritually organized self, resentment's not allowed. Just like depression and sadness and anger, all these things are kind of excluded from our culture as a whole, and also our counterculture, which I feel like people then can use their spiritual practices and concepts and ideas to wall themselves off from what's really there, or what's also there. And from there, she was like, I see how I use my faith, like that everything's perfect, that I use that as a way to insulate myself from feeling disappointment. And like all of a sudden, all her spiritual ideas and truths that she held as this is how it is just got shattered, because the darkness broke her. And then it was really like, actually, I'm angry, I'm resentful, I'm sad, I have grief, all these things that are obviously within all of us that we just don't have the time and the space to feel.
It's almost like, do you feel that this is in some ways kryptonite to definitely the material spiritual world that is just so just blasting and burgeoning out into the world, but also sort of how do you feel this relates, or where is its place in the psychedelic landscape of so much psychedelic work being done? This felt like a very different flavor for two reasons to me. One, because it's elongated, and two, because you're really going down to like the only drug is your consciousness and body with no other drugs. Like you're not giving us sugar. We're not having caffeine. I could have had caffeine, but I mean, I was back to like just me. Obviously not my phone, which was a huge deal, having no technology for 5-6 days for my travels. I mean, that alone was big. And so in that ways, how do you think it compares to a psychedelic journey?
I mean, I think one of the things that stands out, and we could take it from New Age spirituality and also plant medicine journeys, in that mostly the drive is to have a peak experience for the most part. If like we're really honest, we're going in because we want a peak experience. Now, the truth is when people come to the dark, there is a part of them that also wants a peak experience, but you're just not going to get it in the darkness. I mean, you may get something cool, but it becomes really clear in the dark that that's just actually not going to make you happy long enough. And so
it will
really
and then you're back in the dark. Yeah.
Then you're back in the dark. And like in life, when we have, whether it's through breath work or meditation or dance or whatever it is, how we engage spiritually in different practices and plant medicine, you have a peak experience and then you get to share about it. And then you have the validation that like that was cool. And then you feel great within. And not that there's anything wrong with it. It's kind of just deeply within us. And once we can see that that's happening, then it just kind of starts to shift on its own. And in the darkness, it's like all of a sudden, there's no more grasping for a peak experience. And there's this Chogyam Trungpa quote, and he's like, if we ever regard any part of ourself or our experience as the dream come true, then we're involved in self-deception.
Say that again. If we're ever involved...
If we ever regard any part of ourself or our experience as the dream come true, then we're involved in self-deception. And I feel like in New Age spirituality and in some way woven into kind of why people do plant medicine and also why people come to the dark, but the dark doesn't really allow you to have that experience, is that there's this reaching for the dream. I mean, and it's like, I mean, it's woven into our culture, but it's also woven into our counter spiritual culture to have the dream, whether it's to be enlightened or to be ecstatic or to manifest lots of money or to whatever it is. There's this grasping for that. But at the end of the day, when that never comes, we all know the dream never really comes and isn't really sustained forever. The only thing that really is eternal is, however one wants to qualify what remains, our presence, our awareness that really never manifests any kind of self dream that fulfills our personality. And I think the darkness really takes us beyond like the dream come true, which is something that we grasp through New Age spirituality. And I think also in that is it takes us, it's like something that moves us to in a wholesome way is transforming, healing, fixing, awakening, like all these things that are woven also into New Age spirituality and plant medicine. Again, that's not wrong or bad, but it's just, it's kind of like another carrot. Like it keeps us not really resting into that which remains. And there's this, and one more is like Meister Eckhart, who was a Christian mystic, and he would say the soul grows not by addition, but by subtraction. And I think that's like a core tenet of, in a lot of cases with plant medicine and New Age spirituality, there's an adding, there's like a grabbing for something, there's a transforming, a healing, a fixing. And in the dark, it's like there's a removing. There's like, actually, we all already are complete and whole. And so the process of getting there isn't adding more, it's like subtracting it all. But through that, we have to enter through the pain and that whole space that's there and let that go as well as we feel our way through it.
Yeah, it's like peeling back an onion. It's the ultimate peeling back the onion. So I would imagine that darkness experiences are very old. I mean, I think we think about mystics going into caves. We hear about that kind of thing, or even I think about cave paintings that you like in France. I mean, stuff that is tens of thousands of years old. And clearly, to get back there, there was no light. Even if you had some form of fire or torch, that would not last. So
Right.
so that seemed to be part of the purpose. There was some kind of rite of passage or reasoning to go like miles through these caves and then paint something and be in there. So if that served some kind of clear experience and value in the past in our history, how do you think it's uniquely suited for modernity and today, or why?
Yeah, I think that's a an interesting thing to explore, because in its past history, it's really, in a lot of places where we look in its past, it was used by advanced meditation practitioners in Dzogchen in Tibetan Buddhism, the Kogis in Colombia, different traditions out of India and Tibet and China. And like now here we are, where like kind of the average lay person who's not necessarily an advanced meditator is going into the dark.
Yeah.
And 99% of the people who come here, it's their first time in solitude. Some people come and they're like, I actually don't even like to meditate. And it's amazing to witness how much the darkness moves them. Like for the first time ever, someone's not actively engaging with their external world. And for the first time ever, the external world, our culture, our counterculture, is not actively informing or influencing how we move and what we do. And so there's this moment, like maybe for the first time in our life, where we're not able to be special or important. I mean, and my kids, I mean, they're right now, they're 7 and 4, but since the time they've been here, they look to me to kind of confirm that they're good and they're right, or that they're not good. But like, and there's this look at I can do, look at me. It's like we're always just in our genetics looking to stand out and be important and be special. And so for the first time in the darkness, that's not possible. You can't be special. You can't be important. You can't necessarily have anyone validate that you're good and you're worthy. And so there's this amazing exploration of what matters most, because all of a sudden, all the things that mattered to us because they validated our worth and our goodness don't matter. And so it's, we've seen people who have had profound awakenings and insights, and transformations in the dark. Some of those people didn't meditate, never meditated, didn't have any kind of practice going in. And it was the darkness breaking them, where they had to ultimately just surrender into what was happening. And then through that, touched this space that allows all of it. And one person that stands out, there's a woman who came and she said, she's like, I don't meditate. I don't like to meditate. I've never done plant medicine. Was the least likely person in my mind to come to do a darkness retreat up until then, and still, and was somebody who likely was the stereotypical person in their high school that was picked on or that was excluded and had a low self-esteem, and that thus carried through her life. And when she came out of the dark, she said, this is the most empowered that I've ever felt in my life. And I felt safer in the darkness than I even do in my home. Like, this was the safest that I felt.
Wow.
And then she was like, I got to love my wounded little girl and like let her know that it was okay and that she's loved and that she's worthy. And she transformed so much. And from what I saw, it was like she no longer had the lens of the world, which was everything to her, informing her that she was not worthy and that she was small and she didn't have anything important to say. And all of a sudden she was like, actually, she was like, I want to say things now. I have important things to say. I have good things to say. Like, she was like, she really just birthed anew because she didn't have the reflection of the world, which is kind of an inverse from most people who go through, like, they feel important and worthy because they do things in their life that set them up, and the world reflects that. And then all of a sudden they don't have that. And there's like a being crushed of like all those things come up. But it was interesting to watch the inverse for her of somebody who doesn't get that reflection in the world.
Yeah. I mean, you just think about since the Industrial Revolution, when we had electricity and then we have light in the dark, and how the world has changed and how our relationship to just what is, especially now, like I would imagine some people I know are never in the dark. Like they sleep with the TV on. There's always some kind of light intentionally included into their world, which is clearly unnatural, probably affects your sleep among other things, but it's just as like never have having an experience before we even knew what true darkness might feel like. It of course is a bit disorienting, sure, but I just think about like the cosmos itself. Pure darkness is a place of pure creation. It's the substrate of where everything arises in a lot of ways, and I can see a value in at least having like a baseline felt experience of like just even experiencing that for a few minutes, just to be like, yeah, okay, that's ground zero. A lot of people haven't had that.
Yeah, it's interesting, like you said. I mean, where darkness was such a natural part of the human existence up until recently, and then how disconnected we've become from the darkness, and how scary the darkness has become, like being in dark places. And a lot of people who come are like, I'm scared of the dark, and they're concerned. And then when they come out, they're like, I was shocked that I actually had no fear. Like I felt sick, so safe in there. And I think this stands out for women, especially, that I hear, is how safe they feel. I mean, men say it too, but women really highlight that. And I was sharing it with an elder once, and he was like, well, yeah, ask all the men in this room the last time they felt unsafe. And they'll probably be like, I don't know, a week, a month, a year, 2 years ago. He's like, and ask all the women. Most of them will say today or yesterday. And I was sharing this with someone, and she was like, well, yeah, and women always feel like they're being watched. And she's like, that never occurred to me until my women's studies class, and my women's studies professor in college mentioned that. And so I mentioned that to my wife, and my wife said, well, yeah, don't you feel like you're always being watched? And I was like, no, I don't. And then there was another dark retreat, and we were having that discussion, and she was like, well, don't you always feel like you're being watched? And so all of a sudden it was this interesting kind of gender thing that I'd never really thought of, and that apparently some of these women hadn't either. And so then it's like another level for women of like, for the first time in a long time, they actually don't feel like they're being watched, and they feel safe at like a core survival level. And so that allows everyone, but I think it's emphasized a bit more with women because of what happens in our culture around the feminine, is that for the first time ever, you're not being watched and you feel safe, that there's just this like general vulnerability that comes online. And because you feel safe and vulnerable, you start accessing stuff in yourself that you never could have before, and that you don't even need a technique or practice to access. It just comes online.
Yeah. I mean, can you just give us a little bit of how you got into this? I mean, how does one, because also we have to recognize there aren't a lot of places set up for this currently. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure some people are thinking like, what exactly, if they're doing a drinking game right now where every time we say darkness or dark, it's like people are quite sloshed. But maybe you could just explain a little bit what we're talking about. Like, what does this look like? And then got to understand like how the hell you even had the idea to do this.
Yeah. So here, the darkness retreats, they're built into the hillside. They kind of look like a little like hobbit homes. And you open a door, you walk down some steps, and it's like a 60 square foot room that has a big 2,000 pound soapstone masonry stove that we heat from the outside. and the majority of it is in the back dark room. And then there's a food pass-through box, which is kind of just like a cabinet that has a door on either side. And then on the other side is the dark room, 250 square foot room with a bathroom, toilet, and sink, and then a bathtub for hot baths, which are really essential. And
Yes.
the only activity, really, I mean, it really helps people relax and rest and have something to relate with, like the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bed, space to roll around on the floor, and a low table on the ground for eating with a cushion. And the space it's totally and completely dark. Your eyes don't adjust to see your hand in front of your face. And it's also fairly soundproof as they're in the earth. So you might hear maybe an airplane for 10 seconds once a day, maybe, or a squirrel running on the roof for a couple seconds.
I heard nothing. Yeah.
Or nothing. Yeah. So all of a sudden it's like what I see is like the wisdom that arises in the dark is kind of akin to the wisdom that people have at the end of life, where it's like you're not looking to the future for satisfaction or fulfillment. You kind of don't care what other people think about you because you're kind of on your way out. And what really matters, you really touch what matters most. And so people go through forgiveness and their grievances and like all these things that come up when it's really clear that like this is it. And I think we hear that all the time spiritually or whatever, that this is it and be here now. But like in the darkness, it's like you actually live it. Like this is it, because you know that nothing's going to change. And it's fascinating. What arises just naturally in that space. I did my first darkness retreat in 2012. Prior to that, when I finished college in upstate New York in 2005, I had begun spending a lot of time in solitude. I had a disillusionment with the world, and so was no longer, for that period of time, seeking satisfaction and fulfillment outside of myself. Everything seemed empty. So there was a turning inward. There was mushrooms. Psilocybin made a big impact on me at that time. And then I got turned on to Ram Dass and spirituality and meditation. So I started spending a lot of time alone. And for the next 7 years, I spent about 2.5 years in solitude, usually 4 to 6 months a year. Spent a lot of time in Baja, up in the mountains there, and Mount Shasta. And in 2011, somebody mentioned a darkness retreat to me, and it really lit me up. I loved the exploration and solitude, and I was like, wow, I'm going to do that. And so my wife and I actually blacked out our house in 2012, and we did a darkness retreat together. And which is very different, doing it with someone and also doing it in your house. But it was a good intro. And I'll circle back to that, but it was a good intro into darkness retreat. And so 6 months later, I went back down to Baja, and there was this earthback dome that I helped finish. I blacked it out and did a darkness retreat in there for 10 days. It was a 8-foot diameter dome. So it was really tight quarters. I had my like waste bucket, my water, my food, my bedroll. It was all in this little space. Really uncomfortable, but I was really committed. And I went in with a spiritual ego. I was like, this is going to be great. And I know solitude. I'm going to be fine. And I was completely floored. After the first day, I was shocked how difficult it was and how uncomfortable it was, because I loved being in solitude up in the mountains. But all of a sudden, I had nothing to connect with, relate with. There was nothing for my awareness to even be distracted by nature. Like I was really floored and humbled. After the 10 days, I was deeply moved by how sensitive I became in there and what I was able to touch and see without doing practice. I was so used to my time in nature and also my years in Vipassana of doing lots of formal meditation practice. And it felt unnatural in the dark. And so I was really taken by how deep I went without any effort. And so at that point, I wanted to build a dark retreat for myself and to have it available for others. So 5 years later, we landed outside Ashland, and we built the first dark retreat. And we started using it at the end of 2020. And there was a meditation teacher, influencer who came from LA within a couple months. And once he left, we were booked out for 5 months. And then it just kind of continued from there. All of a sudden, it was like, wow, this is actually quite popular. And I was blown away because I thought the audience would be people who were kind of like me, who had spent a lot of time in solitude, who had done a lot of meditation. And then all of a sudden, that wasn't who was coming. And then all of a sudden, it was like the people who were having really profound experiences actually didn't have much meditation background, had never been in solitude. And I was continuously and am continuously humbled of witnessing people have far more profound and transformational experiences than I ever did in the darkness. And then we built 3 more a year and a half ago and started using them in January. And now we're exploring building a few more with like kind of a central lodge as we continue to kind of evolve and refine the offering.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a unique experience, and you guys have made a very specific space for it, which is nice. I did hear one thing in there. I just heard that little fan, way in the distance, and I was like, I could always like, that's the one thing, the air exchanger, I guess, that was like pulling in fresh air. But I want to also give some props and credit to Adrian, who does somatic work with people traditionally, I suppose, but when they're going in and coming out, for me, it was multiple times. And I found that to be absolutely critical, because it wasn't like it gave me a map. It gave me an experience with her to help move energies and help, I guess it's more like a lending hand, but I've continued to work with those modalities. That's been a big shift with therapists since then. And actually we just talked the other day about maybe doing something remotely together. And it's, man, it was so important. I mean, I kind of think like if I didn't have that, I'm not sure I would have stayed or made it. Can you speak a bit to what do you think, particularly Adrian's work? She's really magical, but just what that is and why it's important, and that layer that puts on this.
Yeah. I mean, so I'd say at this point, 95% of people get the sessions with Adrian before and after.
Do it.
And yeah. And it's amazing to witness what happens for people. I mean, where people are almost like, how impactful it is, those sessions. And I mean, the foundation of her schooling is somatic therapy and cranial sacral. And yet what seems to really happen is like emerges out of the depth of her being and like kind of where she rests within. And so I have an impossible time describing to people what she actually does or what the experience is like, because it's far beyond what anyone can really imagine because of her unique gift. But I think one thing it does do is everyone after their session feels like ready or prepared or more like in themselves. And I think another thing that it does is it allows people to begin to see parts of themselves that they weren't able to see before, which is kind of like what the darkness does, but it happens in a context with someone else where you feel held and you feel a connection. And I think it allows it to come on more easily, where you begin to, through Adrian's gift, like your subconscious opens up, you start to see aspects of yourself or tendencies and patterns that you couldn't see before, total blind spots. And now they come into the light and you begin to have a new relationship with these aspects that you didn't see. And then you go into the darkness, and then that really comes online even more. But you've had a taste of how to move with, how to feel, how to be with these things that you just never saw in yourself before.
I also found that she's working largely with your body as an intelligence and a communication device in a way. And it helped me recognize how I could watch feelings, subtle feelings in my body, and track how they might be bringing up an image or a memory that normally I'd just be like, whatever, it's just random stuff, and realize it's not random at all. As a matter of fact, the reason it's so easy for it to come up in your mind because it's you, it's your body. Of course, it's so simple. It's just like boom. There's just like you just kind of see a shape, or you see a bird and you think you're just thinking about a bird. It's like no, follow that. Just give it space and time. And when you're in the dark, you're really only with your body and your consciousness. So it's sort of helping you say like, well, just you have time in there. So I would sit in the tub especially and just do more of that work where I'm just like watching what comes up, whether it's a feeling or a memory, and then just going with it, letting it take me down these avenues and roads through feeling. And at least for me, a big dumb intellectual type rationalist kid who grew up in the suburbs, like I was not as in touch with my body that way. And that's a big vanguard of learning for me. So she really helped me with that. And it also helps to move what's coming up. It gives it like an avenue of communication that I feel very committed to today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to watch when some people get into the discomfort that arises for everyone in there, that there's this like, I mean, when you said like it allows it to move, there's this like people don't want to feel. This is what I witnessed, and in myself, there's this like not wanting to feel the discomfort or the depression or the sadness or the grief or the anger, or we don't have time. Either one, we're not feeling it, and that tends to be the thing that gets it to actually move. And there was this woman who came last year. She's like, I've been clinically depressed for 5-6 years in therapy, hasn't really done much. And she was in the dark. And as we were exploring, one of the things I ask people when they're in the dark, because it really takes on a different form when they're in there, is like, what matters most? And in our life, people might be like love and peace. And then it's like, but then like most of the things we do in our day to day is like really not coming from the inside out from love as much as we maybe think. It might be to like get the validation or reflection that we're loving, or to seek worth in the world. But when we're in the dark, we don't have that ability. So it's like, it really becomes real where you are and where you aren't, like what you want and what you want to want. And as she was in there, she's like, I want acceptance. Like that's what matters most to me. And then the next night when I went up to chat with her, she was like, well, I'm depressed and I feel horrible. And I was like, well, what about this acceptance that you want? She's like, well, I'm afraid that if I accept this depression, that it won't go away. That if I actually really bring it in and feel it, it won't go. And I asked her, I was like, well, what if it never goes? What if it's just always going to be a part of you? How would you want to relate with it then? And when I went up the next night, she was so happy. She was crying. She was like, I've never experienced gratitude in my life. I've said thank you. I've been part of gratitude circles, but like I feel it in my body. She's like, the moment I authentically felt my depression without wanting to change it, transform it, fix it, whatever, I just felt it and brought it in. She's like, it was gone. She was like, that was it. Like it was that instantaneous that once I felt it, like it gave it an avenue to move. But there was that like kind of leaning out because it didn't feel like something I wanted to felt. And culturally and counterculturally, being depressed is bad. Like it's not, like it's so in us. On top of it not feeling good, it's also, we have all these overlays that like, that's not good. It's not spiritual. It's like all these things that also inhibit us. And it reminded me, there's another woman who came and I was like, how you doing? She's like, well, I feel really negative. And I was like, well, is that something that you feel like would be beneficial to explore and feel? And she's like, I was negative and depressed for so many years. And then I discovered spirituality and I've been practicing positivity for the last 10 years. And that's really been working for me. And I was like, well, but maybe that's an overlay, and there's underneath that, there's still negativity. It just didn't go away. And she's like, well, I'm afraid if I feel this negativity, then it won't go away and I'll revert back. And I think that can become maybe an unfortunate effect of New Age spirituality, where there is just this grabbing for the dream and this like, let's be blissful, and like this that's also important, and that's been deeply woven into how I move in my structure. But I've been learning through this work here of like also making space for being angry, for being depressed, for being like whatever's there without trying to change or fix it, and just allowing myself to rest in that. And Adrian's been monumental for me in allowing myself to not be on top of my game, to be broken, to fall apart, to be sad.
Yeah, that sums it up for me, is like allowing myself to feel broken. And I also, I think, wanted to feel accepted, like on a core level. If I found that at the very basis of all of it, it's like once I started going into school, I felt like I had to do these things and achieve to feel essentially accepted. I no longer felt accepted just by existing. And all the things I've done since then to essentially feel accepted, even like all this music, and eventually I got into like being on stage and being an actor and being a musician. It's like it was a way of getting acceptance, and because in some level I didn't feel it without that from the world, even though my parents loved me. But it's amazing when you try to find the root of some of the pain, and that was illuminated to me in there. I also, it's public knowledge that our football friend Aaron Rodgers came there because it just like exploded on the internet. He and I connected before he came there because he was coming there, and I just left, and like we have some mutual friends, and I thought, well, it's got to be Scott's place and of course it was. And so we talked, and he went in, and we've talked since then, and we both found it to be very powerful. But I was a bit, I wouldn't say surprised, but a bit disheartened by the reaction by some of the super mainstream world, how they just immediately throw the experience under the bus, like out of the gate, and I'm wondering if that sort of attention you found no big deal or annoying, or if there has been any kind of blowback, or if the interest increased by something like that. Because that's what I love about Aaron, is that he doesn't give a shit, really, what people think about the thing. And he does speak about these things, like whether it's his ayahuasca experience or just the value that they've had in his life that he did them, or like all he really says, like, I'm going to the darkness retreat to think about my life and retiring. I mean, on face value, what I wanted to say to everybody else, like, let's see you try it. Like, I'd be like, great. I guess you're going to think about this very deeply. And instead, it's just like, let's make fun of the guy. And that was disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, or not interesting, disheartening, but also telling of like even just witnessing as some of our Instagram reels blow up at times or go viral, and just watching the comments.
Oh God, the comments.
I mean, social media. So that's just like the nature of social media. People get to hide behind whatever and let it all hang out. But there wasn't, I would say there wasn't like a negativity from the mainstream that came through to us. There was more like a general curiosity.
Yes.
And like it definitely, it rippled out. Like there was a producer that makes shows for Netflix that was like, hey, we want to make a darkness therapy series.
A reality show in the dark.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they realize, oh, we can't film anything in there. It's all just people talking.
Yeah. So it definitely piqued, I think, the masses' interest. There was like a new wave, which with each kind of influential person that comes through, be it in like fitness or wherever anyone's at, there's this new wave of a different group and audience of people who are interested. And so certainly once people found out that Aaron did, which was beautiful. All of a sudden it was other people saw the benefit, or they just heard about it. And there's definitely a crazy overwhelming wave right after that news broke, and it's since kind of mellowed, which is nice because it was a bit too much. But yeah, it definitely like expanded the audience of people who were interested, in experiencing something like this.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like most people I tell it to, or everyone, there's two reactions. Either like fear and that's crazy, and a lot of my friends though are more like, "Oh my god, I really want to do that," you know.
Yeah.
And then I say, "Well, I'm sorry to say, you can put your name on the list. There's not much I can do for you. It's a long waiting list."
Yeah.
But
So that's one of the movements of. Oh, you're going.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, what's the difference, really, if you think about it, from doing a super good eye mask versus traveling to a place like this and you go into a specialized space that's dark?
Yeah. Well, I think a few things. Well, one is like it's more than just losing your sight. So, I mean, I guess if you're going to be, I mean, for example, I did my first dark retreat was in a house. I blacked out my house, and there's something about you're still relating and connecting with stuff, with things that you have some frame of reference with. So like you're not like there's something about going to a place that you've never been and being in the dark that drops you so deep into the unknown. There's nothing in there that you have any prior relationship with.
So I hit my head more than a few times. Yeah.
That would be one of the downsides. But, like, so all of a sudden there's a nothing there that you relate with. So like immediately you're touching something new because you're relating with something you've never related with and you don't have anything to kind of go back to. Maybe somebody brings the pillow that they love, but like, it's nice to have some of those things, but like you're totally out of your space. Another thing is being somewhere where there's no sound or basically no sound. So like that goes deeper into like experiencing the eternal, where it's like nothing is changing. You're just in this space that's eternally the same, yet it is different because there's still texture and movement and things are happening in there, but externally nothing's changing. I think also having support is really one thing that I've really noticed is like a little bit goes a very long way. And so having someone who is there, who's able to track with your experience and assist in self-reflection, not necessarily overlay a technique or a practice or anything, but just like provide another lens to see yourself through is pretty essential, because we all get stuck in our loops and our ways of being and blind spots that we can't see. And if there's somebody who has some kind of skillful means of helping us see things that we couldn't see before, just asks the right question at the right time, and then all of a sudden we see that we were stuck in this way, but actually like that's not what I want. Like there was somebody who came and I had asked her, what matters most to you? And she was like, well, spirituality. And then as she was in the dark and really exploring that, she was like, actually, I really want to be rich and famous. That's what I want. And I was like, that's great. Like, let's go with that. You want to be rich. Like you're touching like what's most true for you. You want to be rich and famous. So I was like, why do you want to be rich and famous? She's like, well, and then she started going, she's like, well, I want to be accepted. And so it was like that was it. And like for her, because of our culture, like if you're rich and famous, you must be the most accepted person there is. And of course we paint these pictures that aren't true, but when she came out of the dark, she's like, I realized that like there's what I want and there's like what I want to want. And she's like, actually spirituality is what I want to want, but what I really want is to be rich and famous and then accepted. And she's like, I realize why I don't get far spiritually, because it's actually not what I really want. What I really want is to be rich and famous. And it was like, well, that's great. And for some people in there, they see that. They're like, they see the difference between what they want and what they want to want. And then so like for me, one of the things that I show up to assist or reflect is like, or the question is like, why? And then some people get through where they're like, well, I want to be rich and famous because I want to be accepted. And then it's like, well, what does it feel like to be accepted? And then for some people, they begin to touch that without the external validation. And because you can't have that in there. But she was younger. It seems that having access to pain and being able to feel that is important. And so one thing I do see is the younger crowd that comes, maybe in their 20s or early 30s. I mean, it's different, but like as a whole, in general, don't have access to as much pain as like people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Yeah. And so those people who are in that older bracket tend to go further because the pain kind of brings them into deeper spaces within themselves, and they don't kind of stay at the surface as much.
It does feel uniquely suited for where we're at today as a people. I mean, everything on the surface level of like everything's so illuminated and our phones blasting light to just everything being so externalized in our world today and quantified. And it's incredible how we quantify everything now. And this is just the opposite, like you said. So in some ways, I mean, God knows how, I'm sure it'd be powerful at any point in human history. But right now it seems like a unique medicine that it maybe isn't for everybody. But you know what? Maybe it is. It's just about like, you just do it as long as you want to do it. I mean, maybe that's 15 minutes. And so it's like, you decide, just like maybe what if people said, and you could do it multiple times. I'm going to set aside an hour. And then it's like, okay, next time I'm giving myself a day, but if I want to come out in an hour, I will. And if I want to stay a day, I will. But I'll make the space for the communication to be able to happen with myself, with these deeper learnings, because we don't have that kind of space in our normal lives, especially not just with our busyness, but with just the light. And I don't think we don't even know what we don't know.
That's right. Yeah, I like the non-quantifiable. And so that's one of the movements of us expanding. It's not necessarily to just like meet the demand and like bring in more business. It's to like evolve, refine the offering to make it accessible for everyone. So the new spaces that we'll build, and they'll have a common space, so that people could weave in and out of the dark. Someone comes and they go in for 15 minutes and they come out and they have a session. They go for a walk. They sit down and drink tea with someone. They go back in. There's this weaving because there's no fixed way to do it. It's not like, right, longer is never deeper. And I mean, we had somebody who had one of the most, like, a full-on, went beyond himself, had a profound spiritual awakening. He was in there for 2 days. And it's like,
sounds like me, bro. I was in there for 12 hours and I was like, what is happening?
So that's it. Like, and I think the quantifiable thing, which is, it's deeply woven into our culture clearly, but it's also woven into our counterculture. How long did you meditate? How long did you stay in the cold plunge? How long did you have your breath hold? Like, there's so many quantifiable things. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have there's no practice, there's no technique, there's nothing that we necessarily offer for someone to do in the darkness that's quantifiable. And because there's no teacher, that's another thing. There's no teacher. So that also strips out another quantifiable thing, is you're not comparing yourself to a teacher. You're not comparing yourself to a practice. So it's like, how do you, all of a sudden you have nothing to define your worth and your goodness because there's nothing quantifiable.
In this moment, I'm actually starting to connect some dots about my own experience. And you asked how it's reverberating. I was having trouble articulating it. But because I was in there realizing I wanted to feel accepted as a child, and I still do now, and I'm finding different ways to do it. And because I came out of that feeling like, well, I do accept myself more, I think that's why I started to create questions for myself about like my career and my work. Not that I don't feel like I like to do it or it's important, but it's just like, well, there is no end to that, which I knew, but I really felt it now. I'm like, all these dreams that I had placed and sort of goals when I was younger in my early 20s that I'm still sort of using as signposts. Like, I want to achieve that, and I think I could. And now, ironically, some of them are almost within grasp. I can kind of see them as like, if I just do these steps, there it is. And for the first time coming out of the dark, it's like, maybe I don't want to do that. And that was really hard for me to have that realization of like, but what if you actually don't want that? Because you don't need that. It's just some goal that means nothing other than you set that goal. And then there's another goal And so it's the not having to quantify. It's sort of moving away from things like, what if I wasn't on Instagram? Or, what if I just went all the way? Or what if I didn't tour as much? Or what if I did a quarter of the albums I do now? And it's not because I don't like it. It's because really taking stock of where acceptance comes from, and that the whole idea of quantification is really fractal. Like it's just a matter of where you're at on the scale. It's always going to be, the grass is always greener, and you're looking forward and back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that kind of touches in some way one of the things that emerged for me out of my last darkness retreat through my session with Adrian as I was unpacking it when I went in. And it was almost like quantifying hope, like how we see hope as like a positive thing. And in there, I began to see how I use hope as a way of insulating myself from what's happening, from actually meeting the reality of the disappointment, but using hope as a way as like, it's going to get better, or I hope I'll get better. And at that time when I went in, my wife and I were in a cycle, in a wave of having difficulty in our relationship. And Adrian asked me, she said, if you let go of hope that you would change, or she would change, or your dynamic would change, if you removed hope, is there any meaning in your relationship right now? And my answer was no, which was so shocking for me to come to, because the meaning that I was at that moment in the wave that we were in, the meaning that I was bringing to the relationship was based on this hope that it would change. And that completely changed me. And that threw us into a new wave, because I saw that like hope was almost keeping me from fully settling into like, this really sucks. And like, it may not change. Like, this is it. And then in that, it started to change, because I could feel ways that I wasn't leaning into fully how much it sucked. But once I started to lean in, there was an intimacy that came online, and it just started to change without me trying to change it. It was just getting rid of hope, and then beginning to see how hope kept me in other areas of my life from actually really showing up, because it was almost like this subtle waiting for something to change, as opposed to just being in whatever was happening.
Jeez. I mean, we keep circling around how it's it sounds like a cliche, but the light or the darkness illuminates the things that don't have much light through it just helps you see the tender aspects that are just frankly covered up by other things. And that's not even anyone's fault. It's almost inevitable. It's just we have so many layers of identity and wounds. It's almost all unconscious. And it's just, that's why it's surprising or uncomfortable, because it's like, wait a minute. And I didn't even fully like quote unquote understand it. It was just like happening. I'm like, why am I crying so much? Or I'd say something and just burst into tears. I was like, what is going on? Like, I didn't walk in there with an agenda. I was like, my agenda, which is a kind of protection, was just to rest. It's like, I'm just going to rest. Boy, am I going to rest. And it's like, boy, did I not really rest in the way I thought I would. So these things, there's an intelligence that we can trust in also, that takes time, and you just have to give it space and let things be revealed. So
yeah, I mean, on that, one more on that note of like covering up, and it was something that Adrian had also helped me see that I didn't see. I was sharing, my wife was about to go in the dark, and she's one of the softest, sweetest, loving people I know. And yet before she was going to the dark, she was having this whole thing that she's not loving. And I was convincing her how loving she was. And I was sharing this with Adrian, and Adrian said, stop covering up her lack. And that really had an impact on me, where I could see that she felt a lack, and I was covering it up and not really allowing her to fully go there. And the next month we went down to Baja together, where we used to live, and we smoked some cannabis, and all of a sudden she looked at me and she's like, I feel sad. And in any other situation prior, if Adrian hadn't mentioned that, I would have been like, what do you mean? Look around. It's beautiful. Like the sun's shining. Yeah. We're in our happiest place. Let's go play. And maybe I would have grabbed her and just been like, come on, and made her happy, or tried to, and then went off and played. But I looked at her and I was like, that's okay. And just like, we just burst out crying and cried for like the next 20 minutes holding each other. And then the rest of that trip, there was a couple other moments like that where for me, it was maybe the first time that I wasn't trying to change her when she was sad or scared. And it was like, let's just lean into that. Like, it's okay to be sad. I don't need to try to change you or fix you. And that was a really powerful moment, and has also come up within me as well, of not covering up my lack and just allowing myself to fall apart, and allowing myself to feel worthless too, and not trying to grab the next thing to make me feel worthy, to actually like see what's there.
Sounds like a lot of allowing. It's good. Well, I want to thank you, and Adrian, but thank you for your invitation to come out there and for the support you provided while I was there, and your openness to continue to talk about it. And is there anything else you might want to add, or like maybe
I think
misconceptions or anything? I think we've had some good corners, and
we traversed a lot of ground.
Yeah. Cool, man. So you're booked up, but do you want people to reach out? Or?
Yeah, we're booked up, but we have cancellations open up. Spaces, sometimes someone writes and they're like, it's someone like, I want to come in 2 days, and like somebody just canceled that day, and it's like, we have a long cancellation list, and we just kind of roll with like what feels appropriate and spontaneous. And so the spaces open up, things happen. So yeah.
Okay.
You never know.
All right. Sky Cave Retreats. And Adrian does not have a website. Is that intentional? I mean,
Adrian is she's as anonymous as she can be.
Well, she sounds busy already just there, but all right, we'll leave it at that. But I'll ask her in the future if she ever wants to be highlighted more.
Yeah, I mean, I think like she's fine. Like if you had someone and they were like curious to like pass on her number, but like she definitely remains anonymous. As much as
down there.
She can.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope to see you again and talk more about it sometime in the future.
Yeah. Beautiful, brother. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Scott, for coming on the show. And thank you again for creating that invitation for me to come out there and experience a darkness retreat for myself. As I said, it wasn't easy, that's for sure, but it definitely shook up a lot of stuff, and there's been some amazing clearings in my own sense of being and psychology and soul since then. So I'd have to say I recommend it, although don't do it unless you want to, because it isn't easy, but it's very powerful. In some ways, one of the definitely the most grounded, powerful experience I've had that dives into the inner landscape, but there's many, many roads to Rome. But thank you again, Scott. And Sky Cave Retreats is in the show notes, and you can learn more by clicking on that link. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Let You In, and this is the track that just got released with Anna and myself. It's fantastic. If you want to hear the whole thing in higher fidelity, I'll stop talking soon, but you can listen to it wherever you listen to music. Of course, you can always go to eastforest.org and see the full catalog there. Thank you again to everyone on our Patreon, and please check out the live dates coming out. I look forward to seeing you on the road. Get your tickets now if you haven't already, and look forward to crossing paths. All right, folks, keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, do it with grace.